Hi, I'm Eric. This is the Longbox Review comic book podcast, and welcome to my May 2025 Reading Pile episode. This is the episode where I briefly discuss the comic books that I read during the month, which in this case numbered 72. 72, yes, because I went on vacation for the latter half of May and the first basically week of June. And so all of these books, actually, I read in the first 2 weeks of May so that I would not get behind in my reading, my reading goals, which I don't know that I've talked about this. So many comic book fans are aware of the 500 comic challenge on social media, where you challenge yourself to read at least 500 comic books per year. And I've been doing that for a few years now, but I decided that I would up my goal to see if I could read even more comics, which means that I need to read at least 63 comic books every month. And so, good thing that I read 72 this month for May 2025. It's not always that way, as if you've been listening to these episodes, you know that I've had a few months where I've been in a bit of a deficit. So I got to get caught up at some point during the year. Regardless, before I get into my reading pile, I wanted to let you all know that I plan to do a live Zoom chat in July 2025, celebrating 15 years of podcasting. So check my socials on Blue Sky, Mastodon, or Facebook, or you can see the now pinned post at longboxreview.com with some information and eventually a link when I decide on the specific day for you to log into Zoom and chat with me about comics or other geeky topics. So I hope to see you there. And if you have questions for me ahead of time, or maybe, if you would like to participate, but you can't make that day, please send them to me. And you can send them to me the usual way. But probably the best way is to send them to my email address at longboxreview@gmail.com. All right, without further ado, here are all the comic books I read in May. Exceptional X-Men 2 through 5. X-Men number 25, which is the version from 2023, because it was referenced in one of those Exceptional X-Men issues. I then I was on the X-Men kick, I guess. I read X-Men Red 1 through 18, and now I feel like I can move on to the fall of the Krakoan era. Hello Darkness, Volume 1, which contained issues 1 through 4. The Quarrel one-shot, which I think I may talk about in a future one-hit wonder episode. Batman and Robin Year 1, number 6. Batman Superman World's Finest 37 and 38. 37 was my last ordered issue because I chose to sit out the crossover with the Justice League Unlimited title and transition to just reading trades for this book. So I read 38 on the DC Universe Infinite app. Jupiter's Legacy Finale, numbers 4 and 5. Saga, number 72. Detective Comics 31, the facsimile version. Batman Adventures number 12, also a facsimile. Dreamweaver Giant Size Special. Brave and the Bold number 60, again, a facsimile version. And I have to say, I've been really enjoying reading these Golden and Silver Age facsimiles that DC has been putting out. Boy, that was a different time of comics, wasn't it? The Polis one-shot. Again, I think this is something I'm going to do for a future one-hit wonder episode. I think what I'm going to do is take some of these one-shots and just talk about a bunch of them all at once in one of those one-hit wonders instead of doing one comic per episode. Anyway, What If, number 25, which is part of the Pants collection. DC All In 2025 Free Comic Book Day Special Edition, number 1. That's a mouthful. If you had Mirror Master on your How Will They Connect the Prime DCU with the Absolute DCU bingo card, I salute you. Wonder Woman Dead Earth 1 through 4. Avengers 213, 221, 223, and 227. Part of the former Pants collection I bought at the CGS 20th event, along with that What If issue. Legion of Night, numbers 1 and 2. I bought these at Golden Eagle in Pennsylvania during that same CGS weekend. And just real quick, you can avoid this altogether. The Other History of the DC Universe, numbers 3 through 5. The Ultimates, numbers 2 through 9. Free Comic Book Day 2025, Fantastic Four, Giant Size X-Men. These Free Comic Book Day titles, man. I wanted to just mention the best part of this comic offering was the Wolverpool and Deadverine short at the end. It takes a stab, see what I did there, at being cynically meta while still expressing love of this medium. And you're just going to trust me. If you didn't read that one, at least go check it out for that particular short. Ocean 1 through 6, Let Her Be Evil, which is an anthology that I'll be talking about a little bit more later. Captain Marvel number 31 from 1974, Wonder Woman number 20, and finally New Gods number 5 to round out the 72 comics I read in May 2025. Of those, I am going to be talking about X-Men Red, Hello Darkness, Jupiter's Legacy Finale, The Dreamweaver Giant Size Special, Wonder Woman Dead Earth, The Other History of the DC Universe, The Ultimates, Ocean, and finally, Let Her Be Evil. So let's start off with X-Men Red, 1 through 18. I believe that's the entirety of that series. When the Krakoan era began, I only bought the trades for X-Men and New Mutants, mostly because I was interested in what Jonathan Hickman was writing in X-Men, and I'm forgetting why I wanted to read New Mutants, other than I like the New Mutants. Probably just the lineup of the characters. But I kept hearing that X-Men Red was pretty good. So right before I left on my vacation, I read those 18 issues. Pretty much plowed through them over the course of a couple days. I enjoyed them well enough, mostly for the art, but it suffered from a disjointedness from issue to issue because things were happening in other series that I wasn't reading. This happened in all the Krakoan era comics I've read, some more than others, like New Mutants. That is certainly a valid choice on the publisher's part if you want people to buy a bunch of connected books, but I chose not to read those even though I could on the app, and I didn't like the experience. And I see Marvel is doing something similar for the One World Under Doom event, which I am interested in because it's written by Ryan North. And while I give them props for telling me which issues I need to read next, I'm not going to. I've got enough comics already in my collection that I need to read. But we'll see. Maybe I'll give in, but it has a lot of comics. Having said that, I love the idea of this book, transforming Mars as a world for mutants, and Storm, essentially, is in charge. I also like the power dynamics with the Council, though it seemed like they just kept adding to the various enclaves that were represented on the Council. Why weren't those represented before they made their appearance? Why did their appearance shift the balance of power? Maybe it was because I was reading them so quickly in that short time period. Maybe I missed something, but it just seemed, like I said, disjointed. Or maybe it was explained in one of those books I hadn't read, which that's also a choice. And finally, I also like seeing Storm as a leader of a nation and just how powerful she can be. And yeah, there was the one surprise event, I think, moment near the end of it involving Magneto, which was, kind of a cool idea. But, other than that, it was just kind of like a mutant politics. But I like that kind of stuff. So I was okay with it. Let's move on to something darker, literally. Hello Darkness, Volume 1. Like I said, issues 1 through 4. I think my friend Travis, Oddfellows Thoughts on YouTube, kept mentioning this title on his channel, and I probably heard at least one other podcaster mention it. So I bought the trade and was prepared to be wowed based on what they were saying. This is a horror anthology book with various short stories by various creators. And while I appreciated the craft of some of these offerings, I was apparently not in a good frame of mind at that time to really enjoy them. Or I guess now, because when I was browsing through them again to prepare my notes, I still didn't really connect with them. Anyway, I recall the stories really upset me at that time and turned me off getting the next volume. if you've listened to my latest The Gutters episode, there's been a major life event I've experienced recently. And so because of that, things are just hitting differently now with me after my father died. And I was already predisposed to avoiding horror media anyway. In fact, after reading the trade, I posted on Blue Sky that it was depressing AF. And I still feel that way. I'm what's going on in the world, and with me personally, I don't want this kind of entertainment. So I'm going to avoid this in the future. Having said that, I like the covers, especially those by Jenny Frison and Paulo Rivera, and the one-page gag strips by Robert Hack that were interspersed throughout the collection. So, the stories were fine, but I couldn't get into them. If you're looking to buy this trade from me for cheap, let me know. All right. Moving on to something just maybe slightly better. I don't know. Jupiter's Legacy finale 4 through 5. I was really pissed at Miller for the reveal in this series. Spoilers right now. That the superpowered folks that I have been reading for years in the Jupiter's Legacy books were really just game for aliens to hunt. And when I say that, I feel like I need to punch him in the face for this. I imagine this is how many people felt watching the TV series Lost, as it revealed certain secrets, and we were like, that's it? Because I felt the same way. It just felt like Miller was having a laugh at us with his, quote unquote cleverness. Fortunately, the final issues turned things around for me a little bit. While it may have been a pat ending, the supers do indeed win the day, making this at least palatable for me. And just a few words on Miller himself. He has tainted my past enjoyment of all of the Jupiter's Legacy books. When I ordered this mini, I had forgotten that he had aligned himself with Comicsgate in the last, few years? But several days ago at the time of this recording, it's probably been more like a week now, this ugly detail came up again with him joining a Comicsgate channel, I guess, on YouTube. I've been long on the fence about Miller's ability to tell a satisfying story. Most of his work that I've read has been miss, not hit. So this series and the way I was feeling about it, and all this crap about him and whatever, this is the nail in the coffin for his work. I don't plan on supporting anything that he does in the future. Something that I did support again is the Dreamweaver Giant Size special. I talked about the Lamort 13 special before and how I was looking forward to more of this. Dreamweaver by Chris Ryall, Nelson Daniel, and Ian Chalgren is definitely not Lamort 13. It's a straight-up linear narrative about an old magic user calling himself the Dreamweaver. He fights against all sorts of monsters and dark magic and now has to transfer his power and knowledge because he's too old and beat up to continue and give this power and knowledge to a young woman chosen by the Dreamweaver's magical companion named Speck. There's a mystery with that particular element. I won't say character because Speck's not really a character in this yet, that I find interesting. While I'm wanting to read the next chapter of the story to see how Bella, she's the young woman, fares against her opponent who's trying to steal her power, her magic, I actually would like to read more about Mr. Carlton, the original Dreamweaver, and his adventures over the years. It's mostly just seeing how, and maybe it's just my age now, how an older person would deal with this kind of stuff. We kind of have that with John Constantine with Hellblazer, but he's in his 30s, early 30s. Maybe a little older, but this guy, Dreamweaver, is definitely, he's in his, I'll say, late 50s, early 60s, so, and I'm much closer to that, that age now. And I I'm curious how older comic book characters could be portrayed as purveyors of magic or superpowers or whatever. Anyway, I'm writing my own comic book. But yeah, as these giant size specials come out from Image, I'm looking forward to more of these. All right, Wonder Woman: Dead Earth, number 1 through 4. After reading Do a Powerbomb by Daniel Warren Johnson, I knew I had to finally read this miniseries, and it was on the app, of course. Someone on Blue Sky described this to me as Wonder Woman's Dark Knight Returns. And while not as satisfying to me as the original Dark Knight Returns, it was splendidly drawn and examined a different kind of Wonder Woman and DCU. One of the darkest ever that I can recall. And you just have to read it to understand why I say that. While I'm not a big fan of stories where our protagonist suffers from amnesia, and Diana does, she doesn't remember some things that happen leading up to it, which gives us the reveals, though, it was interesting to read this story along with Absolute Wonder Woman. Both are very different takes on the character compared to her normal DCU status. Yet there are similarities. The dire circumstances, the isolation from her people and friends, the consequences of the conflict. Yet both have hope as an undercurrent, which I very much am wanting to read more of. Stories about hope and goodness and justice. And that's why I read superhero comics for all these decades anyway. I wonder if Johnson's portrayal had any influence on Thompson and Sherman's because of those similarities. I doubt it, but those are common things, right? All right, let's move on to another DC comic, The Other History of the DC Universe, 3 through 5. Finally finishing this miniseries by John Ridley and Giuseppe Camuncoli and others. Issue 3 was Katana's issue. Number 4 was Renee Montoya's Question issue, and number 5 was Thunder, which was nice considering that the series started with her father, Black Lightning, in issue number 1. And by the way, the Jamal Campbell variant covers to these issues are just phenomenal. They're so pretty. I love them. Ridley's vision of these characters and their place in the DCU makes the world so much richer and darker. There is racism and misogyny and prejudice present in our shiny, hopeful DCU, but I appreciate Ridley and the artist portraying that verisimilitude with our reality in the DCU. It certainly makes me feel very different toward, say, Thunder, who seemed like a cookie-cutter superhero's kid when I read her adventures with the Outsiders. I'd like to reread those issues now with this portrayal in The Other History of the DC Universe in mind and see how the character lands with me years later. Likewise, I loved how Katana is portrayed and how the supernatural aspects of her sword is not just downplayed, but recast as myth-building. There's also a strength to the character that I don't recall being in those Outsiders issues, at least not in this way. It's because of that portrayal that I enjoyed Katana's issue the most out of all of the issues in this series. And I highly recommend you check these out if you have not. Yeah, it's a bunch of prose. It's basically an illustrated short story. A bunch of prose with some lovely illustrations throughout, but Ridley really has the voice and the characters down, and just this interesting view of the DC universe through a racial and feminist lenses that I think is really cool. Obviously, that they're not going to do anything with that in the main books, in the main DCU, at least not in the same way that I could see them extrapolating more of what Ridley's vision was. But it was certainly nice to experience that and think about these characters in a completely different way than they've been portrayed in the past, for the most part. All right, speaking of different versions of the same characters, the Ultimates 2 through 9. I read issue 1 last year, and I'm not sure why I didn't keep up with the series. I think I was maybe wanting to read Ultimate Spider-Man a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not sure what the reason was, but it is, of course, this series is the making of the Avengers in this different Ultimates universe before the Maker returns and does bad stuff. I did find a bunch of things interesting about this story so far, such as the commentary about greed in corporate America, the parallels between what's going on in the White House now and what was portrayed / revealed in issue 2 are not too far off from each other to me. So, America Chavez is back in my comics. Yay! I love that character, and I was not happy to see what changes they made in that miniseries from, a year or two ago. Unfortunately, she has amnesia. I freaking hate that trope. Anyway, issue 4's look at what this universe's Reed Richards experienced and how he was forced into being doomed by the Maker was chilling and so sad. Just wonderfully portrayed by the artist in that particular issue. And then finally, the Guardians of the Galaxy in issue at number 8. I want that comic. Those versions of the Guardians, what they're doing, they could totally do an Ultimates Guardians, and I would read that. If I have a complaint, besides amnesia, it is that there hasn't been enough time with the characters and what they are doing, feeling about their situation. For example, America is rescued and she helps the Ultimates, but why? How is she feeling about not knowing who she is in this mission of theirs that she is now part of? Why did she make that decision? To be fair, we get a bit of that in issue 7 between Captain America and the Human Torch, and with a little bit with Wasp and Giant Man, but it just wasn't enough for my taste. I need more character stuff and less plot in this case. So, but I quite enjoyed this book, and reading them 7 issues or so all at once was a good read. Ocean 1 through 6. I think this digital deluxe edition of Ocean and Orbiter was on sale. Plus, I like Warren Ellis's work generally, and I'm always hungry for a good sci-fi comic, so I bought it. Ocean was okay. There are some cool sci-fi ideas of a near future where mankind is mining resources in the solar system, in this case, Europa. Our story's hero, who is an interesting and capable guy, is investigating what exactly is going on at Europa and to put a stop to it if things start to get messy. But again, corporate greed rears its ugly head to F everything up. Chris Sprouse, Carl Story, Randy Mayer, and others provide us with a somewhat cinematic space adventure, but it's not like, say, The Forged. I get 2010 Aliens and Europa vibes from this, if you are familiar with all those films. But I wouldn't call it a pastiche of those films, just familiar tropes at play. And while I didn't think Stories Inc. were consistent from scene to scene, it wasn't a showstopper. But it was a serviceable, it was an enjoyable, I should say, sci-fi story where, if people so chose, they could take that same main character and put him in other situations and tell more stories. So I doubt that will happen, but it's possible. All right. And then finally, Let Her Be Evil. This is an anthology edited by Cassandra Jones I backed on Zoop last year. The book blurb describes the anthology like this. If you're looking for sympathetic anti-heroines or villainesses with tragic backstories, you won't find them here. Let Her Be Evil is a celebration of unapologetically wicked women with cruel intentions, of the nasty, the vile, the rage-fueled monstresses who know exactly what they want and aren't afraid to get it by any means necessary. The 17 original stories collected in this anthology explore and nurture the darkest sides of femininity. Of the 17 stories, here are some of the highlights that I enjoyed. Trap Fixer, which I believe is the first story, by Sarah Naveen, shows a young lady who has outgrown her father's usefulness wanting to strike out on her own to trap and torture people. Freak by Michael Lindberg shows us a young girl who already knows she wants to be a serial killer and asks one to train her. And there's a turn at the end, which I really liked. Dogma. It's 2 words, dog and space ma, Dogma. By Knight, Mertz, and Jepson was the first one that I actually liked. It's about a young woman who kills death and ransacks heaven just so she can retrieve her beloved dog Stig. The Hill by Jaden, Sanders, Good, and Parada was even more disturbing than the first 2, with the young lady weighing the worth of her terminally ill stepbrother's life compared to that of her and her family's, well, mostly her father's, well-being. There's a really nice intersection of Newton's third law and what she did that the way that was discussed or shown on the page that I particularly liked. I also like the M.K. Tran art in A Cave Overlooking the Ocean. This story is also the epitome of Jones's thesis of the anthology. At the end, the point of view character reveals herself to be, death, quote unquote, death, and, quote, and I love who I am, unquote, she tells us. Finally, I really like the B cover by Allison Sampson. It's a playing card motif showing the Queen of Spades, where the woman actually holds a spade, and then the upside down version of that image has a bloody spade. Both women are smiling, one a little more evilly, shall we say, than the other. You might be asking yourself, Eric, you definitely did not like the offerings in Hello Darkness. What makes these stories different? Answer, I'm not sure. Other than there's a playfulness in most of these stories, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek quality to them that makes them more palatable to me. Maybe 2 Hello Darkness stories just seem to be about cruelty for its own sake, and just wasn't for me. So, anyway. All right. That's all I have to say about the 72 issues that I read back in May 2025. If you were curious about my thoughts on any of the issues I did not talk about, or if you have comments about what I did say on any of these comic books that I did, please send feedback or questions for me for the 15th anniversary podcasting Zoom live event that's coming up in July 2025. You can send those to longboxreview@gmail.com. You can also leave voicemail or text me at 208-953-1841 or contact me via social media at Longbox Review. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.